studying Jump, the Short Story by Nadine Gordimer, and I've been talking about her storytelling through her colors. Colors shape our view of the world. What we buy, what we wear, where we go. Now, these are usually strategically placed by marketing teams, but we all get the idea. It rings true, and they go beyond that. Every person who can see color has a preconceived notion on color, some taught by their culture. For instance, the association with colors and feelings, i.e. happiness is yellow, sadness is blue, and red is anger. Colors can mean sentiment or memories, but generally people are all on the same page about colors and feelings. We all know that colors are descriptors, like adjectives, all adding to the big picture. Colors shape how we view the world, and Nadine Gordimer uses this in a really interesting way. In the short story Jump by Nadine Gordimer, the author doesn't name her main character, but she doesn't need to. She makes it very clear that she can do the imagery by herself. She creates the character in such a way that completes him without using that name. She uses imagery and pieces like color that are adjectives to tell her story in a much more interesting way than if she just told us. Gordimer touches on race in her book about South Africa. Often in the book, it's notable to mention this because race is specifically color in South Africa, white and black. Culturally, Gordimer is from South Africa, and there, black means like inhuman, and white means like righteous. But Gordimer doesn't really touch on this in her book as much because she seems to be a little unopinionated when she writes. She uses the color as a descriptor for the larger image. In this quote, he sits in the red gloom in front of the widescreen television set, the fuse of a cigarette between the fingers in his fine white hand and his pale blue eyes. This is on page 13, it's right towards the end. She's describing this main character that's unnamed, and I highlighted these colors because they really make that sequence. The red gloom. Gloom typically means sad, right? It's like, I'm gloomy today, but red, typically, everybody knows that red is either passion or anger. So when you look at red gloom, it no longer is this sad gloom, it's like this anguish. It's a passionate gloom. And that really describes the character. Nadine Gordimer does a really good job of this right here because this character isn't sad, but he's also really angry. And she touches on this in this whole set when she uses words like the fuse of a cigarette between his fingers. Cigarette's kind of a harsh word. She uses these harsh imagery like red gloom, and then she moves into the end where she talks about his fine white hand. In this quote, the use of white doesn't seem as racial as it is just a color. And it's really highlighted by the words next to the color. Fine white hand. So now you know that the white hand is fine. Versus if she just said white hand, it would be a little more racial than that. And the pale blue eyes really make it too. Now you have this image of the character. It's the words that are around the color that make the image, but the color is the part in that that's really important. In this next quote, the knuckles are delicately pink, clean hand, scrubbed and scrubbed, but along the V between the first and second fingers, there is a shit-colored stain of nicotine where the cigarette burns down. She uses this really harsh language. Nadine Gordimer does it in a lot of the story. In the beginning, she says, knuckles are delicately pink, clean hand, scrubbed and scrubbed. She repeats these almost compulsively, which really highlight how compulsive the scrubbing and scrubbing is of his hands. And that word pink, we all think of pink as something soft and feminine typically. So especially when she highlights it with that delicately and clean, it characterizes the color as well as the character. And then the second half, Gordimer uses these harsh images to describe things like the stain where the nicotine sits for his cigarette. Gordimer artfully applies these harsh sequences to her writing to bring it all back to a central place. In this, she jumps up from talking about how he used to have all this nice stuff, the nice car, the nice house. He was living the lavish lifestyle. And then she makes an image using angry and harsh words to describe where he ended up. And it even goes back to that first quote, that anguish that he has inside of him. It all goes back to the central place of anger. These descriptors, adjectives, color the image, and it colors the story. It really creates this whole ambiance. Gordimer does a really good job of using this to create a mood. adding feeling and levels to the nameless character. Her methods of image making add overall rhythm to the piece, the way it moves and comes alive. She's really good at making her pieces come alive, and that's why we read it at school, right? It's such a good book. Not to be too opinionated. Gordimer seems to always write this way. She writes throughout all of her stories like this. She tells her stories more clearly in her adjectives than in her straightforward, concrete words. Towards the end of all the stories, she typically does a plot twist, but her adjectives stay the same in they're always going to be the same way. She really does a good job of setting up this kind of rolling rhythm and then going with it. So why these specific colors? Earlier I touched on culturally colors. Think about it. Think of a color and you associate it with something. The movie Inside Out. Kids know what colors mean. Culturally, we learn green with envy. We learn blue is sadness. Are you feeling blue today? Red is always really strong passion because it's such an alarming color. And Gordimer uses these almost as harsh language, and she uses the colors specifically. And she puts them in the story, and without the colors, it would be totally different. The importance of Gordimer doing this is it wouldn't be as notable if she didn't. Gordimer's work would not be as notable, and it would not have such beautiful imagery. She really, really drills these in, and it makes it such a rhythmic piece. Why does she do this? Gordimer uses imagery through adjectives like color to complete her stories. Without these images, the words would not be as moving and exciting. She makes these images and she sets it up, and you're on the edge of your seat during the entire piece of jump. And then she comes in with these adjectives and it colors the piece like a blank picture. Gordimer tells her stories with more than just concrete information. She uses adjectives like color to tell her stories. Colors have their own meanings. Personally, when I think of pink, I think of Sharpay from High School Musical, but you might think of a pink rose or blushing cheeks. And culturally, like I said, green with envy and feeling blue today. We all hear these words all the time, and we associate colors with feelings. This adds these beautiful levels to her stories that make them so notable. Gordimer uses imagery with adjectives like color to complete her stories. Without these images, her work would not nearly be as the same.